Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take the material you share with us and, well, we dive deep, unpack the most interesting insights.
That's right. And today, we're looking at a recording you sent over that covers some really fascinating ground.
It does. It starts by looking at how we think about superpowers today in our modern world, but then it pivots to something quite different.
Yeah, a detailed look at historical accounts, specifically focusing on the resurrection accounts in the Gospel of John.
It might seem like, two totally separate things at first glance, flying cars and ancient texts.
But the material finds a connection, actually. It asks us to think about what we consider extraordinary, maybe even, well, miraculous, whether it's technology today or events described long ago.
So that's our mission today, to walk you through this material, pull out those key insights, the things that make you think. Let's get started.
Okay, so this idea is superpowers. The recording kicks off by asking you, the listener, pretty directly, if you could have any superpower, what would it be?
Right, the classic question, flying, invisibility, always fun to imagine. But then it does this really interesting flip.
It asks us to put ourselves in the shoes of someone from, say, Jesus' time. What would they think if they saw us today?
Imagine it. Someone from 2,000 years ago seeing a jumbo jet fly overhead, or looking at a smartwatch displaying health stats.
Or us talking instantly, face-to-face with someone halfway around the world, controlling lights in our house with a little device in our pocket, even, organ transplants.
What would they make of it? The material suggests they might see us almost like the Nephilim from the Bible, those beings that sort of blurred the line between divine and human.
Yeah, and it focuses on something we barely notice anymore, the smartphone. It calls it a walking computer.
Giving individuals tremendous, immense power, it says, especially compared to just, 10, 15 years ago?
It's absolutely true. The information access, the communication, the control you have, it's incredible.
But here's the kicker, right? None of us walk around thinking, I have superpowers. We just use our phones. It's completely taken for granted.
And the recording pushes this further, speculating about the future. What happens when today's science fiction becomes tomorrow's reality?
Like really long lifespans, maybe close to that 1,000-year mark mentioned in Genesis, or readily available physical or mental enhancements.
Even then, the recording asks, will we just be looking for the next thing, the power we don't have yet? Will we ever feel super?
And this is where it gets really personal, I think. The point is made that if everyone can fly or live for centuries or has enhancements, well, then those things aren't super anymore. They're just normal.
Exactly. So it proposes something else. It says your unique qualities, the specific things that make you different from everyone else, that's like your own sleeping potential superpower.
And it includes a warning, too, that trying too hard to fit in, to be like everybody else, getting the same phone, playing the same games, liking the same celebrities,
you actually risk losing sight of that unique thing, that potential superpower that only you have.
It even references the Bible, noting that those who just go along with the crowd are sometimes just called the multitude, nothing distinctive.
So the message from this material is develop what makes you different, even if other people don't get it or even dismiss it. That's where your real contribution, your real power lies.
That's such a different way to frame it, isn't it? Super isn't about having what everyone else wants. It's about embracing what makes you unique.
Okay, let's shift gears now.
Right, to the second major theme in the recording, the resurrection of Jesus. And it focuses particularly on the doubt surrounding it and this idea that the resurrected Jesus seemed changed, different somehow.
Yes, the material is very clear. It states that Christianity, fundamentally, it begins with the resurrection. Belief in it is central.
But it also straight up acknowledges that resurrection is just hard to grasp. It's so far outside our normal experience. We have no real comparison point in our everyday lives. And a key theme the recording picks up on across the different gospel accounts is that people often didn't recognize Jesus immediately, even when he was right there revealing himself.
It mentions Matthew's account specifically, where it says that even after some saw him and worshipped, they still doubted. There was still uncertainty.
And why was that? Why the difficulty recognizing him?
Well, the explanation offered is pretty compelling. It's because the resurrected Jesus was clearly the same person who died. He still had the wounds, the marks of the crucifixion, but he was also somehow profoundly different. There was this strong impression of difference, as the material puts it. And it was that difference, that unfamiliar quality alongside the familiar, that made immediate recognition hard. and led to that doubt.
Okay, so the material then dives into a specific example of this difference, right, from John's gospel.
Yes, the second appearance Jesus makes, according to John, this is on the evening of that very first day, the same day Mary Magdalene had encountered him earlier.
And the scene it paints is vivid. The disciples are huddled together, doors locked. Why? Fear.
Understandable fear, too. They'd just seen their leader publicly executed by the authorities. The recording suggests they were likely in crisis mode, trying to figure out how to avoid the same fate. Survival strategy.
And what's really striking, as the recording highlights, is the mood. It's fear, anxiety, maybe confusion, but not excitement, not joy.
Even though Mary Magdalene had already brought them the news earlier that morning, John 20:88 says she told them, "I have seen the Lord."
So why weren't they, buzzing with anticipation?
The recording suggests a couple of reasons. First, just sheer disbelief. I mean, someone rising from the dead after that kind of death, it's fundamentally hard to accept.
And a second reason.
The social context. In that culture, a woman's testimony didn't hold legal weight. So they probably, sadly, just dismissed what Mary said, maybe thought she was overwrought, mistaken.
So there they are, locked room, fearful, dismissing the initial report.
And then, bam,
Yeah.
Jesus is just there in the middle of them. The recording uses this phrase, popped up, which really captures the suddenness, the unexpectedness of it, even though the doors were locked.
That locked door detail is key, isn't it?
It's a critical point the material emphasizes. It strongly suggests the resurrected body wasn't just, a resuscitated corpse. It was different, fundamentally different.
Because if it were just a normal physical body back to life...
You'd have to knock, right?
Yeah.
Wait for someone to nervously unbolt the door. Appearing inside a locked room, that implies something else entirely.
More like a spirit. Or a ghost, as some might think.
The material uses those comparisons, like a ghost or some spiritual being, to highlight the non-conventional nature of this appearance.
And this leads the recording to re-examine some of the traditional proofs of the resurrection, but in light of this apparent ability, like the empty tomb.
Right. The empty tomb and the rolled away stone are obviously hugely significant pieces of evidence. But the recording makes a subtle point. If Jesus' body could pass through locked doors...
Then theoretically, it could have passed through the stone slab, sealing the tomb too.
Exactly. So while the empty tomb proves something extraordinary happened, the recording argues it might not, on its own, definitively tell us about the nature of the resurrected body specifically, whether it was constrained by normal physical barriers. It's a nuance.
Okay, what about the wounds? John 20:20 says he showed them his hands and his side. Surely that proves it's him physically.
It certainly proves it's the same person, the one who was crucified,
Yeah.
no question. But the recording notes the specific wording, he showed them. Meaning it could imply they just saw the wounds. It doesn't explicitly say they touched them in that first encounter.
So someone determined to disbelieve could potentially still argue.
That they saw a convincing spirit or apparition, one that could even display wounds but wasn't necessarily solid, tangible flesh and bone in the way we understand it. It leaves a sliver of doubt open for a skeptic.
And that sliver of doubt brings us neatly to Thomas.
Ah, Thomas, yes. Famously, he wasn't there for that first appearance in the locked room.
So the others tell him, "We've seen the Lord." You'd think he'd be overjoyed, or at least curious.
But no. Thomas, who John tells us was also called Didymus, meaning twin, he flat out refuses to believe just based on what they say.
And his conditions for belief are incredibly specific, aren't they? Almost forensic.
Absolutely. He says, unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were and put my hand into his side, I will not believe. No ambiguity there.
The recording calls this a normal, realistic reaction. Not necessarily a lack of faith, but maybe an intensely practical, evidence-based mindset.
Yes, it uses a phrase suggesting he was someone who would strongly dismiss something unbelievable as just, nonsense, without concrete proof. He needed something undeniable.
So fast forward a week, what happens?
The disciples are gathered again, doors locked, just like before. And this time, Thomas is with them.
And Jesus appears again, same way.
Same way. Suddenly there, inside the locked room.
And what's the first thing he does?
This is amazing, and the recording really focuses on it. Jesus immediately turns to Thomas, and he repeats, almost word for word, the exact conditions Thomas had laid out the week before.
When Jesus wasn't physically present to hear him say it.
Exactly. Jesus says, put your finger here, see my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe.
Whoa. So the recording flags this as another sign of how Jesus was changed.
Precisely. How did Jesus know Thomas's specific demand from the previous week? It suggests a new kind of knowledge, an awareness that wasn't limited by physical presence. Another aspect of this different resurrected state, maybe another superpower to tie it back.
So Jesus makes the offer, touch the wounds, see for yourself. What does Thomas do?
He responds with that incredibly powerful, famous confession, "My Lord and my God."
But did he actually touch? The recording mentions there's some debate, right?
Yeah, a bit of scholarly discussion. Jesus invites him to touch in verse 27, but the following verses aren't crystal clear on whether Thomas did touch or if just seeing Jesus there, offering the proof he demanded, was enough.
Jesus' response, "Because you have seen me, you have believed," could suggest seeing was the trigger.
It could. However, the recording itself leans pretty strongly towards the idea that Thomas did touch. Given how adamant and specific his initial demand was, it feels psychologically more likely that he needed to complete the action he set out.
But ultimately, the recording argues whether he touched or just saw isn't the main point.
Right. The absolute core is the confession itself, "My Lord and my God." Coming from Thomas, the ultimate skeptic, the one who called it nonsense without proof, that declaration is presented as the decisive moment.
It's like his profound statement makes the "did he touch or not" question almost irrelevant at that point. Game over for doubt, for him at least.
That's the perspective, yes. And the recording then makes a really interesting point about the structure of John's gospel.
It suggests that chapter 21, the final chapter, is more like an epilogue or an appendix.
Correct. And that the intended conclusion of the main narrative is actually the end of chapter 20, specifically verses 30 and 31.
And what do those verses say?
They state the whole purpose of the book. "These are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name." The goal is belief in Jesus as God.
So it's really significant then that John chooses to place Thomas's confession right before that concluding statement.
Immensely significant, according to this analysis. Verse 28, "My Lord and my God," becomes the climactic affirmation that the entire gospel has been building towards.
The recording also digs into the word Lord Kyrios in Greek used by Thomas.
Yeah, it points out that Lord wasn't always a divine title back then. It could just be a term of respect, like calling someone sir or master. Mary Magdalene even uses it for the man she thinks is the gardener earlier in chapter 20.
And the disciples often called Jesus rabbi, teacher, or Lord in that respectful human sense before the resurrection.
Exactly. But here, in Thomas's mouth, after encountering the resurrected Jesus, the meaning undergoes a massive shift.
It's not just my respected teacher anymore.
No, it's "my Lord and my God." The pairing is crucial. It signifies, according to this interpretation, a complete transformation in understanding, from seeing Jesus as a great human teacher to recognizing him as divine, as God himself. Someone to be worshipped, not just learned from.
Wow. So reflecting on this whole journey through the material you shared, it's taken us from thinking about our own tech as sort of hidden superpowers
All the way to this incredibly intense personal encounter in a locked room, dealing with doubt, a changed reality, and ultimately a profound statement of faith.
We've looked at how easily we overlook the miraculous in our own lives, how people grappled with disbelief even when faced with the extraordinary, the hints about the different nature of Jesus' resurrected body.
And landed on Thomas's confession, prompted by that direct encounter, "My Lord and my God." The recording argues that this confession, born from confronting doubt, is really the bedrock moment Christianity is built on.
It certainly makes you think about how we perceive things, doesn't it? What we label normal versus miraculous, whether it's an iPhone or an ancient text.
Absolutely. It challenges us to look again at both.
So as you, our listener, reflect on all this, what really stands out to you?
And maybe here's a final thought to chew on, something inspired by that first part of the recording. In a world that pulls us towards conformity, towards being part of the multitude, what is your unique, maybe still sleeping, superpower?
And perhaps, how does wrestling with doubt, with things that challenge your understanding, whether it's the implications of technology or ancient claims about resurrection, how does that process actually lead you to your deepest, most solid conviction?